I have the honor of introducing the foundation that was named after that adorable and feisty little dog. The fun. Dave and Cheryl Duffield felt strongly about the human-animal bond. After all, they had experienced a strong connection themselves with their dog, Maddie. They made her a promise, to help pets like her to have a joy-filled life like she was living, and for people to have an opportunity to share in that same kind of standard across the United States. Maddie was the inspiration and the promise that started a pioneering legacy to fund projects that helped make the connection happen, including the largest personal investment in animal welfare by a family, and to date has awarded over $255 million in grants towards increased community, life-saving, pioneering shelter medicine, and establishing foster care as a standard of care in the United States. Maddie's Fund proudly offers our industry a national voice, important funding opportunities for bold ideas, learning resources, and access to collaborate and to share innovative solutions. The foundation invests its resources in a commitment to keeping pets and their people together, creating a safety net of care for animals in need, and operating within a culture of inclusiveness, and humility. Now it is with great pleasure and esteem and admiration to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote today. But first, let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Lyla Miller embodies excellence, perseverance, and a drive to achieve goals. She is my colleague and friend, someone I admire for her accomplishments, and these being done in the face of challenges. I could go on and on about who she is and what she's accomplished, but let me just share one brief story that shows her in action. We were at a conference like this one. We had to go somewhere, and there was this massive crowd just in the way. And I'm like, trying to get through the crowd, lead the way. And Dr. Miller said, "Forget this." And she just pushed me aside, and then I saw what it means to part the Red Sea. Without pushing over anybody, it looks like a force field just separated that crowd, and I'm like, that's the person I want to follow. Join me in welcoming Dr. Lila Miller.
I can't believe you told that story. What an honor it is to be reunited with you all here today at Expo. My entire career has been spent working with shelters, so I consider us to really be a family. I want to thank HSUS for asking me to deliver this keynote and Maddie's Fund for sponsoring me. I have to admit I was overwhelmed when I got the invitation. I retired in 2019 after 42 years of working with the ASPCA, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about. But after Maddie's Fund gave me their amazing Avanzino award last year, there seemed to be some interest in me telling my story. So here I am. I'm so flattered with the title of Mother of Shelter Medicine, but I have to acknowledge some of the other members of the shelter family who helped me along the way. I'm going to start with Dr. Joe Tate, the Jamaican veterinarian who was my mentor and who convinced me to work at the ASPCA. Dr. Jan Scarlett, who had the vision to start the first course in shelter medicine at a veterinary college, and my supervisors at the ASPCA, Julie Morris and Steve Zawistowski, who recognized early on, and you all know Julie Morris, she was a wonder. We miss her dearly. And they recognized the value of shelter medicine early on and supported me doing things that weren't in my job description. So let me tell you a bit about my background. Like so many other vets, I always wanted to be one from when I was about 5 years old. But I think the similarity with other veterinarians probably ends there. I'm from Harlem. I still live there. I had never met a veterinarian, had never been to a vet's office, and I had never had much contact with animals. I had a dog named Tippy, who we adopted from the ASPCA, and I had a parakeet. I'm going to show you a picture of that's me and my older brother with Tippy, who was so important to me growing up. So I don't know where the passion to become a veterinarian came from, but I never wavered from it. So my high school educated parents were determined to see me take advantage of the educational opportunities that appeared during the 1960s civil rights movement. And these were opportunities that had been denied to them. And here's a picture of me with both my parents. I was lucky enough to be included in a special educational program at an elementary school that was located in my Harlem neighborhood. When I was in 6th grade, I was told to take a test to get into Hunter College High School. And it was just another test to me. I didn't know what that meant, but I passed it despite predictions that I wouldn't. And so I went from an all-black elementary school uptown in Harlem to a 6-year-long, all-white, all-female, very elite high school downtown near Park Avenue. Everybody went to college. You know, the academics weren't a problem for me, but you can probably guess that there were some challenges being the only black student in most of my classes. On the one hand, my friends told me they didn't see me as being any different from them, as we shared all the same interests, watched the same movies, same TV shows, laughed at the same jokes. But in 6 years, only one person ever invited me to her home or to do things together after school. But then when Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968 and rioting broke out, I suddenly became the resident expert on black people. And I was being asked, why are you rioting? I resented that, but I wasn't totally surprised because by 1968, I was heavily involved with the National Board of the YWCA. And these were not like college radicals. These were older white women who taught me all about institutionalized racism, things I wouldn't have learned any other way. They firmly believed that racism would destroy America, and the YWCA adopted a radical public policy initiative in 1970 to eliminate racism by any means necessary. They told me how racism showed up and its terrible toll on society. They told me that no matter how smart or talented I was, some people would always associate me with the negative stereotypes they had about black people. Not only would many people take what I said as representing the opinion of all black people, many people would also form their opinion about black people based on my actions. So I often turned to them for advice about things that happened to me at Hunter. But truthfully, that wasn't important to me. All of my energy was focused on getting into Cornell, despite being discouraged by my guidance counselor, who thought I should do something else that would really help black people, and having been told by a reliable source that Cornell's vet school didn't accept black students. Well, I thought, I've got good grades, I'm a New York State resident, this is 1970, I have the full support of my parents, and I resolved that I was going to get in. I decided my best chance was to go to Cornell's undergraduate pre-vet program, so I applied and was admitted. Now, despite my high grades, and I had taken advanced placement biology at Hunter College, they put me in beginner's math and beginner's biology because they believed that black students were deficient in those subjects. So I started to protest, but then I realized that these would be courses I could get A's in, so I kept silent, you know. That was something else the YWCA had taught me. Pick and choose your battles very carefully and try to turn things to your advantage whenever you can. So I was one of the first 2 black women to be admitted to Cornell's Veterinary College in 1973. And that was the first year they opened up for women. Here's a picture of me with 2 of my classmates in the anatomy lab. You know, we were so busy, we didn't have time to go out and eat lunch. You can see my friend was eating while we were dissecting this sheep. So I didn't expect to be embraced with open arms, but I thought I was ready for whatever was going to come, and I was wrong. There were many racist incidents over the next 4 years that kept me upset and distracted me from studying. You know, it's one thing to understand racism. It's quite another to be called the N-word while you're driving your car going down the road. I mean, it's not funny, but I looked around to see, who are they talking to? You know, who are they yelling at? And I realized I was the only car on the road. It was me. But the defining event at Cornell that changed the course of my life occurred during my junior year. I'd had numerous asthma attacks that culminated in a near-fatal attack that made me seriously reconsider being a vet. My main allergy was to horses, but the doctors assured me that I would soon be allergic to cats and dogs, and that would have a serious impact on my ability to practice. We didn't have good asthma drugs back then, no inhalers and things like that, so I met with the dean to discuss leaving the program. Well, he dropped the bombshell on me. And he told me that despite having met all the admissions criteria and doing well in the school, I was a guinea pig, and that my failure to graduate would result in no more black students being admitted. So, despite agreeing with me that that wasn't fair, he assured me that that would be the outcome. So, I didn't want to die, but I decided that I had to graduate for the sake of black people everywhere. But then I would go do something else, and I would never, ever return to Cornell. And there's a picture of me graduating. On that day, one of my professors took me aside and confided that many of the faculty had indeed tried very hard to keep me from graduating, validating my belief that the things that happened to me were deliberate and racist, and that I was right to leave the field. The problem with that was that I didn't know what else I could do. That's all I'd ever dreamed of since I was 5 years old. So Dr. Tate, a private practitioner in Harlem who was the consultant to the ASPCA Animal Shelter Program, asked me to work in the shelter to improve the conditions there. Well, I had visited the shelters with him as a student, and I thought they were just terrible. You know, I was fresh out of vet school, I was tired, I was angry, I was frustrated. I wasn't interested in blazing any more trails or accepting any more challenges. I mean, shelters had never once been mentioned when I was in vet school. I had no training and no confidence that I could make a difference, and so I said no. But he argued that I didn't have anything to lose, I was leaving the field anyway, and that I could always quit if I didn't like it. Well, that made sense. So I changed my mind and I said yes. But it didn't take long for me to get hooked, as I realized that here was a chance to make a difference in the welfare of a population of animals that nobody else really seemed to care about. And I really liked the idea of doing work that other licensed veterinarians shunned. The only other vets working in the shelters were unlicensed veterinarians from other countries, and that suited me fine. So this was 1977, 45 years ago. I know a lot of you weren't born then, but you know, it seems like it was just a couple of days ago sometimes. The situation was really bleak. The ASPCA was a vastly different organization from what it is today. It was consumed with the contract for animal control in New York City. It had a minuscule budget and few resources. Incoming animals were placed in colony kennels according to the day of the week, and very few were examined or adopted. And though it seemed impossible, we began examining each animal within 24 hours of their arrival. We created medical records, we vaccinated, dewormed, and treated whatever we could. We isolated healthy, owner-relinquished animals and placed them for adoption immediately. That was sort of like my version of today's fast tracking. We replaced the decompression chambers with euthanasia by injection. I did rounds, I wrote a procedures manual, I supervised others while continuing to work hands-on in the shelter. So little by little, we made remarkable strides in improving the care of the animals. And here's a shot of me. This was circa 1978, working in the shelter. So I was very pleased with that progress, but there was a downside for me. I had looked forward to escaping Cornell and returning to a safe and familiar environment in New York City. But guess what? I was still subject to harassment. Some of it was sexual, some of it was racial, and some of it I still don't know what they were mad about. The workers used to slash the tires on my car. They would glue the locks on my office door and complain about me all the time, saying I didn't know how to talk to people. So Dr. Tate investigated, and he concluded that the problem wasn't what I said or how I said it. It was that I was a young, attractive, professional black woman, and nobody wanted to listen to me. So he feared I might quit, but I told him, don't worry. After all, I survived Cornell. Okay? So as far as I was concerned, what they were doing was child play, because they were playing with my stuff, but not my head. So each incident simply increased my resolve to keep working, and like the old deodorant commercial used to say, never let them see you sweat, you know. And this is a picture of me examining one of the puppies, and it's a picture of me doing surgery. But after 5 years of working in the shelter, I was asked to run a low-cost outpatient clinic in a very impoverished and underserved area in Brooklyn. The board of directors back then, this was 1982, didn't think that those people would bring their pets to a vet. So Dr. Tate had to make a deal that even though the main hospital in Manhattan was hemorrhaging money, if our clinic didn't make money or break even, they could shut us down. So I was reluctant to get involved with that because I liked working in the shelter, and I didn't want the pressure of having to make money, supervise people, work with the public, work with other veterinarians, but I knew the neighborhood needed an affordable clinic and needed to see a black woman veterinarian, so I agreed, but only if Dr. Tate would oversee the business end and allow me to continue working in the shelter. Well, the clinic was a big success, okay, undergoing 2 renovations and expanding from a staff of 3 to 10. And there's a picture of our staff celebrating, I don't know, there were so many things to celebrate just because we were able to stay afloat. But excuse me, when Dr. Tate decided to leave, I was asked if I wanted his job, and I said yes. I said, after all, I was already doing it. I was told I was doing a great job and that nobody else wanted it. But a week later, they told me that they had given it to somebody else who, incidentally, had no shelter experience at all. So when I asked why, they told me, well, that's just what we decided, and they left it at that. So I thought about leaving. But I got to tell you, I really loved being in charge of doling out free care. And I knew I wouldn't be able to do that anyplace else, so I stayed. Even my staff got annoyed at me. They said I was gullible and too willing to help people who were driving late model cars and wearing expensive jewelry. But I didn't care about any of that, and I continued to base my decisions on the needs of the animal, not the owner's possessions, and we continued to do well. But the clinic closed after 15 years when the city decided to renovate the building. Steve Zawistowski offered me a new position in his animal sciences department, which I immediately took because I was really burned out from running the clinic. I worked on various projects for him and Julie Morris's shelter outreach department, and then one day Steve told me that a Dr. Jan Scarlett was looking for somebody to teach the first course in shelter medicine at a veterinary college, and he had mentioned my name. That was the good news. The bad news was that it was at Cornell. And God, did I whine. Oh, no, you can't do that to me, not Cornell, any place but Cornell. I'll go to Timbuktu, give me a break, this can't be real. I went on and on and on. I mean, I was still having nightmares about Cornell 20 years after I had graduated. But I also knew that if shelter medicine succeeded at Cornell, which was considered the best veterinary school in the country, other colleges would follow suit. And I really wanted to share what I had learned over the years. I also thought it was an opportunity to bring some diversity to the vet school and maybe finally lay some of my demons to rest. So I set aside my personal vow to never go back to Cornell and taught the first class in shelter medicine there in 1999 to 7 students. And that's a picture of me teaching that first class. Okay, the class grew every year, and eventually, Cornell offered me an adjunct faculty position, and in 2014, awarded me their highest alumnus award. And today I serve on their advisory board. So how ironic is it that, thank you. You know, that devastating triad of asthma, racism, and Cornell that nearly ended my career started me on this incredible journey. So, you know, my career spans over half a century. I really can't, you know, get into so many of the things that I've been doing since then. I've seen a lot of progress and remarkable changes at Cornell and at the ASPCA, as well as in animal sheltering, and you know what I'm talking about, changes in veterinary medicine as well. A dramatic decrease in the overall number of animals being euthanized, the change in veterinary medicine from a predominantly white male profession to females dominating the scene. We've got Dr. Blackwell's extraordinary efforts to improve access to care, the amazing Maddie's Fund. I mean, the list goes on and on. But we still need to see better cooperation between shelter vets and shelter management. We need to see integration of shelter medicine and animal cruelty topics into the core curriculum of veterinary schools. We need to see more veterinary involvement in animal welfare. We need to see more partnerships between vet schools and shelters. I mean, I really believe every vet school should have a relationship with a shelter. I mean, it's a win-win for the animals, and it's a win-win for the students. And that's just a partial list of what we need to do. But I couldn't end this talk without mentioning my disappointment at the lack of progress regarding diversity, especially considering everything else that we've achieved. We've certainly seen some improvement, but not enough. I still remember being asked to help recruit more black students to Cornell in 1973. I was a student there, and I refused because I didn't have the time or the expertise, and I told them to hire a professional. They asked me if I thought they should lower the standards, not even understanding what an insult that was. I suggested maybe you need to reevaluate those standards because they're arbitrary and they set up barriers to keep minorities from applying. Several years ago, I asked an admissions committee member if he thought that since Cornell was a state-funded school, didn't they have a responsibility to look for minorities just like they were looking for people from Long Island and New York City and upstate New York, all over the state? And he said, frankly, no. I also asked a prominent animal welfare leader if he thought we could make any meaningful progress promoting animal welfare without making diversity a priority. And he said no. But when I asked him what the plan was, he admitted they didn't have one. So I'm glad to say I believe the answer to both those questions is very different today. So in conclusion, I've been truly blessed to have been able to make some contributions to animal sheltering and veterinary medicine with the support of my family, friends, and many talented people from very diverse backgrounds. And also a lot of soul searching, sleepless nights, and some really hard work. And last but not least, I still don't agree, but my mother always said I was just stubborn, you know. So this is a picture of the billboard that Maddie's Fund put up in Times Square in Manhattan, announcing July 10th as Dr. Lila Miller Shelter Medicine Day and celebrating the amazing Avanzino Award. I didn't get to see it in person, but every time I look at that picture, it makes me smile, you know. And I want to thank HSUS and Maddie's Fund again for giving me the opportunity to share part of my story with you. And thank you all, my extended shelter family, for listening. Thank you. So, thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Blackwell and I are going to have a conversation. It's not rehearsed. I don't know what he's going to ask me, so you got to bear with us. And remember, I know where you live.
Please. I've heard a few of your stories over the years, and a few questions come to mind. Okay. First of all, you named some people, some situations and certain people who stood in the way. But along the way, you also had some allies, and you've noted a couple of them in your talk. Have these people been along the whole journey, along the whole time, or they just showed up at the beginning?
Well, Dr. Tate was my mentor, you know, and in order to get into vet school, you had to have experience with small animal medicine and large animal medicine. I was trying to find somebody in New York City that would give me the opportunity to visit their practice, and I was actually going through the telephone book before I got down to T, Dr. Tate. He was the first vet that actually talked to me. And when he found out that I was black and lived in the neighborhood, and he was from Jamaica, he was like, get your ass over here right now. You know, and he supported me all the time I was in vet school, and so it was really instrumental having him step in when I said to him, I'm not doing this. And he was like, well, wait a minute, let's not be hasty here. You know, maybe there's another, you know, thing that we could look at. So he was certainly instrumental. Julie Morris, I know you all know Julie Morris. Unfortunately, Julie passed a few years ago, but I couldn't have done half of what I did without her working with me. I mean, so many times I was in her office and we would plan and scheme and laugh and joke and just come up with all of these ideas and just say, let's go for it. You know, so yeah, and Steve Z, same thing. He got the shelter medicine opportunity with Jan Scarlett. And I was sitting in his office one day and I said, you know, I've been making handouts to teach this class. It'd be really nice to have a textbook. And then it was like a week later, he said, I found a publisher, let's do it. You know, so I've been blessed to have these people, as I said, and coming from all these different backgrounds. Same thing with Jan Scarlett. When I went up to Cornell to teach, and I was really reluctant to do that. I said, I don't have any teaching skill. But Jan said, don't worry about it. I know teaching, you know shelters. This is a marriage made in heaven. And we have really formed a strong friendship that's lasted till today. So I've been blessed having these people show up along the way.
Well, I appreciate your story. You know, I meet people who are reluctant to achieve success because they haven't figured out the entire path. In other words, they don't see the end necessarily from where they are standing at that point. But when you have a calling, it's a little bit easier, right? When you're called to do something,
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering how the calling, did you question your calling with all the stuff that you were dealing with?
The only time I questioned my calling was when I was having these asthma attacks. You know, and they were coming every day. I was constantly going down to the infirmary to get injections of epinephrine. We didn't have all this great stuff we have now. But I still was intent on doing it until, you know, they told me that if you don't finish, you know, that's it for black people.
Yeah.
So then I knew I had to do it. But I don't know why, but I just never wavered from it. And you're right, when you have that calling, it's easy to do that. So many things that I didn't want to do, but that calling just said, you know, put your animosity to Cornell aside. It's time to let that go.
Yeah.
You know, when the people were harassing me at the ASPCA in Brooklyn, and I harbored all kind of fantasies of what I could do to get them back, you know. My brother was a police officer, and sometimes I said, I'm going to get him down here. But I didn't. My brother would have ended up going to jail, so I never told him. And that was difficult, because I couldn't tell my family about all the harassment. Because I know my parents would have said, we sacrificed to get this girl into Cornell, and we did all of this stuff. She's not making any money, right? There's no prestige. I mean, at that time, working in a shelter as a veterinarian, you didn't talk about that. That was a place where old veterinarians went, retired veterinarians. It just wasn't a real career move. And they said, that was a waste of a Cornell education. But I was going to help these animals. Nobody else cared about these animals, so I was going to do the best I could for them.
You know, these days there's a lot of talk about belonging. Like, what does that look like? How does that feel, belonging? When you think back over your path, were there ever times when you felt like you belonged? I think you probably felt like you didn't belong when that was going on.
Yeah, most of the time
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't belong.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't want anything
What
to
does
do.
it look like I mean, some people seem puzzled by what that means to feel like you belong.
Well, it's really like being an outsider. You know, I'd go to veterinary conferences, I would try to talk with veterinarians, and kind of reached the point where I didn't want to talk to them anymore, you know, because they didn't sympathize with what I was talking about with shelter animals.
Yeah.
The other area that I really worked hard on was animal cruelty. Because there wasn't anybody, and veterinarians weren't talking about animal cruelty. The people that were prominent in animal cruelty discussions were not veterinarians, you know. And so when I would bring that up, veterinarians would feel like, what's she talking about? You know, I remember being at a dinner one night, and I was talking about bestiality and zoophilia. It's not your most palatable dinner topics.
No,
but
it's not. Yeah.
And I was down at one end of the table having this conversation. I had my voice down pretty low, but then I noticed that the rest of the table had gotten very quiet, and everybody was kind of leaning over to hear what I was saying. And again, there was this sense of, I don't have to worry about that. That's not a problem with my clients. You know, I wanted to talk about animal cruelty I was invited to go to Indiana to talk about animal cruelty to their VMA. And I was all set to go, and then they called me back and said they had canceled the invitation because animal cruelty wasn't an issue in Indiana. I said, okay.
So I'm curious, why don't we see battle scars? I mean, it sounds like you've been fighting some battles along the way, right?
Yeah.
Where are the scars? Are there scars?
Yeah, there's scars, but you know, it's like I said with that old deodorant commercial, never let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
I said we internalize that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and we justify the things that we're doing because we know there's a greater need. I mean, I did things that I really didn't want to do. When they asked me to run that clinic, I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I really like working with the shelter animals. I don't want to deal with the public. I had worked with Dr. Tate in his hospital, and I saw, you know, the trauma of being a veterinarian and dealing with people who didn't have a lot of money, and you didn't want to recommend euthanasia, so you were always trying to do things. And I was like, I don't want to do this, but there wasn't any place else for people to go in Brooklyn. And the thing about the ASPCA was that they had told me, if people come here and they want help, you help them. Now, he told that to the wrong person. And I used to tell my staff, if they get past you and get in here in this office, I'm going to help them. You worry about the cars they're driving and the jewelry they're wearing. I said, once they get in here, my focus is on the animal. Yeah. And that lets you do a lot.
Well, I imagine there are a lot of questions in this audience. There's a mic over here. Yes, see the hand raised. We're going to invite you to come up and ask Dr. Miller anything, any question.
Wait a minute. Now, don't let's not say anything.
Ask her anything. We can only take a few, but Dr. Miller will be at the Maddie's Fun exhibit after this session, and I'll be joining her there. And hopefully, if you can't ask a question now, you'll come by and speak with her. Anyone?
I'm off the hook.
So, how did you retire? Because it sort of feels like the mafia. You can't get out.
You know, for a long time I thought I couldn't retire, but when I talk about the remarkable changes that I saw, you know, when I was on the organizing committee to make shelter medicine a board-certified specialty, I was on the committee that wrote the guidelines for standards of care in animal shelters. I had been on a NRC committee that made the recommendation that they no longer use Class B dealers to procure stray animals for research. And you do these things and you see that there's other people in the pipeline who are following along behind you. And I recognized that at one point in time when I got started, I answered any request to speak because there wasn't anybody else doing it. And now I see there's so many, veterinary forensics experts, there's so many, shelter medicine, infectious disease experts. And I said, people said, well, you can't retire. I said, I've been working since I was 16. I've been at the ASPCA for 42 years. I'm kind of tired, And it makes it easier for you to move on when you see this crop of people who are dedicated and smart and can just do the work. So, yeah, I like being retired. I think we're out of time.
No, we're good. We're good.
You're,
No, we're not going to let you go yet. We have another question.
your story is so beautiful, so compelling. Are you writing a memoir?
Ooh.
When is your memoir coming out?
You know, I've been asked to do that a lot, and it took me a lot of time to get over a lot of my resentment and anger about Cornell. I mean, I felt like I hear so many people talk about their college years and how much fun they had. I didn't have any fun when I was in college. You know, I formed one or two friendships, but I was studying all the time because, you know, there's this pressure, not just for me as an individual, but for all black people. So I couldn't afford to fail, and you just keep going. But I thought these stories were part of the past. I really said, you know, let it go, put it to rest. And I've been surprised at how many people have said, no, we'd like to hear those stories. And unfortunately, I thought those were old stories. You know, there's a Black DVM network and there's a multicultural society, and I've talked to them, and they unfortunately have said to me, Lyla, it's still happening. It's not part of the past. It's not old history. It's current events. So I don't know. I think I'd rather do a movie and let Halle Berry play me or something.
That's a good one.
All right.
Yes.
So we have one question from our online participants. Hillary would like to know, what advice for people do you have who are considering following in your footsteps?
Don't. You know, if you're talking about, you know, being a veterinarian, you know, this is a really challenging time for the veterinary profession. And I've had a lot of parents come to me and tell me that their children want to be a veterinarian, and I said, I don't really actively try to push people to be veterinarians. I'll talk to you if you've already made that decision, because I think we really are in crisis, and we've been in crisis for a while, and we're seeing where they're talking about veterinary shortages. They did a study, and they said 40% of veterinarians are thinking about leaving the field. Mm-hmm. You know, so I would tell, you know, young people that if they want to be veterinarians, that they really need to look very carefully at their reasons. You know, because if it's just because you love animals, veterinary medicine might not be the place to be. You know, we're a profession that at this point in time, and we're trying to change that, you think you're there to help animals, but sometimes you can't. And it may be the economic circumstances. You know, there are a lot of reasons why you might not be able to do that. So I tell people, if your kids want to be veterinarians, you really need to try to get them an opportunity to maybe stop by a veterinarian's office and really examine their reasons. My niece wanted to be a vet, and I asked her, what do you want to do? She didn't want to work as a small animal vet. She didn't want to be a large animal vet. She didn't want to be working with exotic animals. She gave me this long list of what she didn't want to do. And so I said, well, what is it that I know what you don't want to do. What do you want to do? Well, I just want to go around and just help animals. I said, that's not a veterinarian. You know, so I tell people to really try and look deeply into their reasons why. And then if you want to do it, then I'd say go for it.
We have another question from the audience. I have one. While you all think about your question, because we have a little bit more time. So, a lot of talk about wellness amongst veterinarians. We've got a lot of challenges, some of which actually threaten our well-being. You have any suggestions, maybe out of your experiences, how one might stay well, stay healthy? I mean, and what I see is a big heart that's maybe being damaged repeatedly, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. How did you stay as healthy as you did through all of the things you experienced?
I don't know that I'm that healthy, but it was just this single-minded determination that this was what I was going to do. The regret that I have is that, I never developed any hobbies. So people, it's just like, because my doctor's always saying when you retire, you got to follow your path. I wanted to travel. So, of course, the pandemic hit right at that time, and I couldn't travel. And so, it was kind of discouraging. And I would always tell people, being a veterinarian is what I do. It's not who I am. I would tell people, don't introduce me in social settings as a veterinarian, because then, people were going to ask all kind of questions that I couldn't answer because I wasn't in medical practice. But I was in South Africa on a safari with a friend of mine, and she was one that was always saying, Lila's not a veterinarian, is what she does. And I saw this lion, and he turned around, and he still had his testicles. And I just automatically said, he hasn't been castrated. And my girlfriend looked at me and said, what's the matter with you? Do you realize where you, it was such an automatic response. And I said, I guess being a veterinarian is what I am. It's not just what I do, And so, I think I like photography. My phone's probably got 50,000 pictures on it. I take pictures of everything. I think that was one of the things that kept me healthy. And also just recognizing that, you're serving as a role model. I don't know how many young people would come up to me and tell me that they had read something I had written, or they had seen me do a lecture. I've had vet students come up to me and tell me that how much they appreciated seeing a person of color lecturing. I had a young girl who was 8 years old write me. I don't know where she learned about me, but she said it was Black History Month and everybody else was doing, Harriet Tubman and Booker T. Washington, and she wanted to do her report on Lila Miller. And I thought, wow, that just makes your head swell and your heart, be open. So I think those are the types of things that would keep me going and sustain me. And, when you have those low moments, you look at something that somebody said to you. I ran an externship program for the ASPCA for a while, and I've had a couple of veterinarians come up to me years later and tell me that something that I said or did changed their whole perspective, and they switched from whatever, major interests they had into animal welfare,
So there's a lot of talk these days about DEI, and you can add the B, belonging. A lot of acknowledgement that the veterinary profession, 85% white, 86% I think is the actual number. I don't know the percentage in animal welfare, but it's in the same family. So what do you see as barriers to change with our profession, with animal welfare?
I think a lot of it is tradition. I spoke to...
What does that mean?
For example, I spoke to the dean at the vet college, and we were talking about the admissions criteria. And I asked him, why do you still require that students have to get experience with veterinarians before they can come to vet school? He said other professions don't do that. If you want to be a lawyer, do you have to do an apprenticeship in a law office? And he said, it's tradition. I said, because that was really the stumbling block for me as a city girl getting practice at a large animal facility.
But it sounds like tradition sounds like a lazy way to do things. You don't have to think, right?
Right.
You just...
This is the way we've always done it. It's always worked for us. And I'm saying, but it's not working for you anymore. Look at the crisis that the profession is in. I mean, we've been talking about this since the 1980s. I was asked to address the lack of diversity in veterinary medicine and animal sheltering probably back in the 80s. And they were telling me things like, well, we heard that they did a study, and that black people are afraid of animals. They don't bond with their animals. And they did a study, and the study to determine whether you bonded or not was, did you take your pet on vacation with you? And I said, we didn't go on vacation. Did the dog sleep in the bed with you? No, he has his own bed. Did you ever take your dog to the vet? I said, we're talking about, a population of people that don't go to the doctor unless they're sick. So when you're trying to convince people to bring their dog to the vet every year and the dog's not sick, I was stunned. I took my cat to a colleague of mine, and the cat had asthma. I was treating it at home. And by the time they did the x-rays and some blood work and everything, it was like $800. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, this is somebody else's bill. You made a mistake, right? And she said, I gave you the professional discount, the friendship discount. I'm not going to charge you for. And I said, it was still $800. We've got these barriers that we don't think black people they don't bond with their animals. Their ownership levels are lower. And there's so many reasons for that, but we don't look at that. I don't know how we change that. Yeah. Because it seems like it's a reflection of what's going on in society today. Yeah. But that doesn't give us an out to not try. And certainly, looking at admissions criteria, I had a conversation when I was on a panel about the lack of diversity, and I was the last panelist to speak, and I mentioned the word racism, and they went through the roof. Now, I was accustomed to talking about racism because of my experiences with the YWCA. So I said, we have to have these conversations or things don't change. And I said, listen, look at the questions you asked on the admissions paper. Have you ever been to a vet? Did you ever have pets? Well, what if you lived in public housing and weren't allowed to have pets? There's so many other, layers that would discourage somebody from applying. And I said, why do you ask all of those questions? And there was one person on the panel that said, oh my God, I never thought about that. They'd ask you, do you have any relatives who are veterinarian? I need a recommendation from a veterinarian for you. Yeah. I never went to a vet. By those standards, I should have never been a vet. A lot of what we need to do.
There are these systemic things.
These systemic things.
Maybe not even necessarily all by design, but many by design.
No, and that's what I tell people. I'm not saying that you are a racist. Yeah. I'm saying that there's some bias in here that you've never noticed because it doesn't impact you. Yeah. And it makes sense to you that if you want to be a veterinarian, you must have had a lot of experience with animals. You must have been to a vet's office. You must know a veterinarian. So I said, well, is there any of that that is an indication that you're going to be a good vet? I said, we're supposed to be an evidence-based profession. Where's your evidence that it makes any difference if that person's going to be a better vet because they answered yes to those questions?
I believe some of the colleges have relaxed.
They have relaxed that. They are relaxing that now. Yeah.
Do we have another question?
3 more questions, and then you'll be done.
3 more questions?
Oh, my goodness.
Hi, hello. Ooh, super close. I just feel like you gave so much of yourself. I wonder if you would have done anything differently to save your own mental health, and what that might have been.
I think, first of all, I compressed my veterinary education to as short a period of time as I could. So when I got to Cornell and I saw the landscape, I said, I don't want to be here for 8 years. So I did like a pre-vet program in 3 years, and I went away to England for 1 year. It was like anything to get away from Cornell, because I felt like if I actually leave school to take a year off, I'll never come back. So it really, if I could have changed it, I would tell people, don't do that. You should have fun during your college years. I was at Cornell when Carl Sagan was there, and I wanted to take astronomy, but because I was condensing my 4 pre-vet, years into 3, I didn't have any room to take anything I wanted to take. Everything was science. Everything, you had to take an English course. I took an English course in uses of the past. I didn't care about that. It was the only thing that was open. I was in class every day from 8 in the morning until 4:30. I didn't even get a lunch break. I wouldn't tell anybody to do that. I think, looking back, that's one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't.
You do that differently.
Oh, I would do that differently. I tell
Like
everybody.
you'd go to England longer, or
Well,
what would you do?
the interesting thing about England was that I thought their education system was so superior to what we were doing in the United States.
You got a bunch of Americans in here. You better be careful.
Okay. I had a class with 5 students, 2 professors, and a teaching assistant. And we used to sit around and talk, and you didn't get an exam every other day, and it was a conversation. And we had oral exams. I was terrified of an oral exam. I was so used to multiple choice and true, false, and all that kind of stuff. And somebody said to me, why didn't you stay in England and go to vet school? Never occurred to me. I loved that year in England, but I had it in my head, I got to go to Cornell,
Let's take another question back here.
Hi. What advice would you give to veterinary students who experience something in their studies that they feel is wrong, but are afraid to approach the administration for fear of retaliation or just, any kind of backlash whatsoever?
I think that the veterinary college, and Dr. Blackwell, you might be better able to answer that. You're a former dean of a veterinary school.
Yeah, but this is your day.
No. You've been waiting for that. I think it depends on the vet school that you go to. I think some vet schools are a lot more open to allowing the students to have more interaction with their professors. And I heard a really sad story about a student who was studying with some other classmates. She was black, and they were studying late in the night, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning when they all dispersed to go home, and she got stopped by the police, and she was held for a couple of hours. She didn't get home till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and rather than go and tell her professor that she, just couldn't take the test that day, she took it anyway and she failed. And the dean said that was a failure on his part, because students should be comfortable to be able to come and discuss their problems, with the administration. So
now, what did we do about some of these animal use policies? That sort of a throwback decades ago. Now, I don't know about you, but when I took surgery, let's just say it was pretty barbaric the way we had to learn surgery. Thankfully, those practices are no longer going on, but I know there are more students in veterinary colleges today that are concerned about how animals are used either in research or in teaching. You want to expand on that any at all?
I don't think so.
You know?
One of the things I said was that I felt comfortable now saying, I don't know the answer to that. No, I do think that, unlike you, we did some pretty barbaric things. I think that the landscape has kind of changed on that. Yeah. I think students do feel more comfortable speaking up and being able to say, I don't want to do that. And I think what it requires is for students who feel that way to try to reach out and see if there are other students in class that feel the same way. I didn't have that when I was at Cornell. Students were very harsh to each other. We had Jewish students in the class that were not treated well. One of the professors was going to give a test on Saturday, and he said he couldn't come. And instead of the students being sympathetic, they were like, well, you should just put your religious, beliefs aside and come take the test, rather than telling the professor that you shouldn't do that. You should have the test when it's an appropriate time.
Can't you all tell she's got a lot more to share with you? We're gonna encourage you again to come by the Maddie's Fun exhibit. Dr. Miller will be in office, and
so will Dr. Blackwell. Okay, so you don't get off the hook, buddy.
Thank you so much.
You all heard his CV, and he's got his finger in a lot more pots than I do. So please be sure.
Time is up, Dr. Miller.